Welcome back to Edzi, your personal AI tutor for Class 12 Physics and the chapter Electric Charge and Fields. I am Gaurav, and with me is Swati. This is an extended episode, so it may run for roughly 30 to 60 minutes. That is a comfortable stretch, not a race. Keep a notebook nearby if you have one, but you can also simply listen while traveling or resting. We will begin with the spark from synthetic clothes and the shock from a car door, then build towards charge, Coulomb's law, electric field, field lines, dipoles, flux, Gauss's law, and its applications to wires, sheets, and spherical shells. A student named Ria from Pune once told us that she could memorize formulas but could not decide which one to use. Today, we will focus on that decision making. We will ask questions, test predictions, notice common mistakes, and frame answers in an exam ready way.
And please do not worry if the chapter initially feels like a long list of formulas. We will keep returning to one central question. How do charges create forces and fields around them? If that question is clear, many expressions begin to feel connected rather than separate. I will keep checking your understanding, especially at the points where students commonly choose a formula too quickly.
Let us first make a map. The chapter starts with static electricity and the nature of charge. Then it explains conductors and insulators, followed by three basic properties: additivity, conservation, and quantization. After that comes Coulomb's law for the force between point charges. We then move from force to electric field, use superposition for many charges, and represent fields through field lines. Melon.
The latter part has a different flavor. We study the electric dipole, its field and its torque in an external field. Then we introduce electric flux and Gauss's law. Finally, symmetry allows us to calculate fields due to an infinitely long charged wire, an infinite plane sheet, and a uniformly charged thin spherical shell. So the progression is charge, force, field, visualization, flux, law, and application.
The opening examples are not decorative. A spark when removing synthetic clothing, lightning during a thunderstorm, and a shock after sliding on a bus seat all involve accumulated charge and its discharge through the body. Rubbing insulating surfaces can accumulate charge. When that charge suddenly finds a path, we experience a discharge. Static means something that does not move or change with time, and electrostatics studies forces, fields, and potentials arising from static charges.
Quick check. If a student says static electricity means there is no movement of charge anywhere, would you accept that statement? Think carefully. The word static refers to the charge situation being unchanging with time. The chapter's focus is on static charges, but discharge can occur when accumulated charge suddenly moves through a conducting path. So the safer exam wording is that electrostatics deals with charges at rest and the forces, fields, and potentials associated with them.
Historically, Thales of Miletus was credited with observing that amber rubbed with wool or silk attracts light objects. The word electricity comes from electron, the Greek word for amber. Rubbing different materials led to observations of attraction and repulsion. Two similarly electrified glass rods repel each other, and two similarly electrified plastic rods also repel each other. A glass rod and plastic rod, when electrified in the described way, attract.
The key conclusion is simple but powerful. There are two kinds of charge. Like charges repel and unlike charges attract. The property that distinguishes the two kinds is called polarity. Benjamin Franklin gave the names positive and negative by convention. In the chapter, the charge on a glass rod rubbed with silk or on cat's fur in the stated experiment is called positive. The charge on plastic or silk is called negative.
There is an important observation after rubbing a glass rod with silk. If the electrified rod is brought into contact with the silk used for rubbing, the attraction disappears. The charged objects no longer show the earlier effects. The unlike charges acquired by the two objects neutralize or nullify each other's effect. This does not mean that charge has mysteriously vanished. It points towards transfer and conservation, which we will formalize later.
How can charge on a body be detected? The gold leaf electroscope has a vertical metal rod, a metal knob at the top, and two thin gold leaves at the bottom inside a box. When a charged object touches the knob, charge flows to the leaves and they diverge. The degree of divergence indicates the amount of charge. Notice the careful wording. The electroscope detects charge, and the extent of leaf divergence gives an indication of its amount.
Normally, material bodies are electrically neutral because their positive and negative charges balance. To electrify a neutral body, one kind of charge must be added or removed. In solids, some electrons are less tightly bound and can transfer from one body to another. Losing electrons makes a body positively charged. Gaining electrons makes it negatively charged. When glass is rubbed with silk, electrons move from the glass rod to the silk, leaving the rod positive and the silk negative.
Let us catch a common mistake. Positive charging does not mean that positive particles have moved from somewhere and settled on the body. In the solid rubbing example, electrons are transferred. A body becomes positive because it has lost some electrons and negative because it has gained electrons. Also, the number of transferred electrons is only a very small fraction of all the electrons already present in the material. Your turn. A neutral body gains electrons. What is its final charge? Say the answer before I continue. Yes, it becomes negatively charged. If it loses electrons, it becomes positively charged. If the positive and negative charges remain balanced, it is electrically neutral. This three-way distinction is useful in one-mark questions and also prevents sign errors in numerical problems.
Now let us compare conductors and insulators. Conductors allow electricity to pass through them easily because their charges, especially electrons in metals, are comparatively free to move. Metals, human and animal bodies, and the earth are examples given in the chapter. Insulators offer high resistance to the passage of electricity. Glass, porcelain, plastic, nylon, and wood are examples. The distinction is about the movement of charge inside the material.
The practical difference appears when charge is transferred. On a conductor, charge readily distributes over the entire surface. On an insulator, charge tends to remain at the place where it is put. That is why a nylon or plastic comb can become electrified while combing dry hair, whereas a metal spoon does not retain charge easily when held in the hand. Charge on the metal can pass through the body to the ground.
But a metal object can show charging if it is handled correctly. Imagine a metal rod with a wooden or plastic handle. If you rub the rod without touching its metal part, the rod can show signs of charging. The insulating handle prevents the charge from leaking easily through your body. So the material of the handle is not a minor dial. It controls whether the charge remains available for observation.
Small check. If charge is placed at one point on an insulator, should you immediately imagine it spreading over the whole surface as it does on a conductor? No. For this chapter's comparison, charge on an insulator stays localized, while charge on a conductor distributes over its surface. The reason involves charge mobility, and chapter says the detailed explanation will be developed further.
Before using Coulomb's law, the chapter introduces point charges. If the size of charged bodies is very small compared with the distance between them, we treat them as point charges. All the charge content is assumed to be concentrated at one point. This is an idealization. It is useful because it allows us to focus on the charge and the separation without dealing with the actual size and shape of the bodies.
The first basic property is additivity. If a system contains charges Q1 and Q2, its total charge is their algebraic sum. For n charges, we add Q1, Q2, Q3, and so on with their signs. Charge is a scalar. It has magnitude but no direction. However, unlike mass, charge may be positive or negative. That is why the signs must be carried carefully during addition.
Take the example from the chapter +1, +2, -3, +4, and -5 in arbitrary units. Adding algebraically gives +1, +2, -3, +4, -5, which equals -1 in the same unit. The magnitude alone would give the wrong answer. Exam point additivity refers to algebraic addition, not addition of absolute values.
Try one mentally. Suppose a system has charges +5 units and -8 units. What is the total? It is -3 units. Now ask a second question. Does minus 3 indicate a direction? No. It indicates the sign or polarity of the net charge. Force and electric field are vectors, but charge itself is a scalar. Keeping these categories separate is one of the foundations of the chapter.
The second property is conservation of charge. When two bodies are rubbed, charge is transferred. What one body gains, the other loses. In an isolated system, charges may be redistributed through interactions, but the total charge remains constant. No net charge can be created or destroyed in an isolated system. Even when a neutron turns into a proton and an electron, the proton and electron have equal and opposite charges, so the total charge remains zero before and after.
This explains why charging by rubbing is consistent with conservation. Before rubbing, the combined system is neutral. During rubbing, electrons move from one body to the other. One becomes positive and the other negative, but the total of the two remains unchanged. If a question asks you to explain the observation using a law, write transfer of electrons and no creation or destruction of net charge.
The third property is quantization. Every free charge is an integral multiple of the basic charge E. The expression is Q equals NE, where N is a positive, negative, or zero integer. An electron carries minus E and a proton carries plus E. The value of E given in the chapter is 1.602192 times 10 to the power minus 19 coulomb.
Quantization means charge changes in discrete steps of E. At the microscopic level, where only a few tens or hundreds of elementary charges may be involved, this grainy nature matters. At the macroscopic level, a charge such as a microcoulomb contains an enormous number of elementary charges. So the steps are too small to notice and charge appears continuous. The scale of the situation decides whether quantization can be ignored.
In SI units, charge is measured in coulomb written C. The chapter also uses smaller units. 1 microcoulomb equals 10 to the power minus 6 coulomb and 1 millicoulomb equals 10 to the power minus 3 coulomb. Be careful with prefixes. A unit conversion error can spoil an otherwise correct Coulomb's law calculation.
The chapter's first numerical example gives perspective. If 10 to the power 9 electrons move out every second, the charge transferred per second is 1.6 times 10 to the power minus 10 coulomb. Accumulating 1 coulomb would take approximately 198 years, or about 200 years. So 1 coulomb is a very large unit for many electrostatic situations. That is why smaller units are common.
Let us recap the first major block. Charge has two polarities, like charges repel, unlike charges attract, and charge can be detected with a gold leaf electroscope. Conductors allow charge movement and insulators restrict it. Charge is additive, conserved, and quantized. If you can explain each property in one sentence and give the electron transfer picture, your foundation is strong.
This is a good place for active recall. Without looking back, name the 3 basic properties in the chapter: additivity, conservation, and quantization. Now connect each to a phrase: algebraic sum, total charge of an isolated system, and integral multiples of E. If you need repeated practice with this kind of recall, Etsy can turn a single doubt or formula into a step-by-step question sequence rather than giving only a final answer.
We now enter Coulomb's law. It gives the force between 2-point charges. If charges Q1 and Q2 are separated by distance r in vacuum, the magnitude of force is F equals K times Q1 Q2 divided by r squared. The force is directly proportional to the product of the charges and inversely proportional to the square of the separation. It acts along the line joining the charges.
What does inverse square mean practically? If the distance becomes twice as large, the force becomes 1/4, provided the charges remain unchanged. If the distance becomes half, the force becomes 4 times as large. Students often remember the square but forget that the change applies to the entire distance ratio. Write the proportionality first, then substitute values.
Coulomb measured the force using a torsion balance. To vary unknown charges, he considered contact between an identical charged sphere and an identical uncharged sphere. By symmetry, the original charge q becomes q by 2 on each sphere. Repeating the process gives q by 4, and so on. He varied distances for fixed charges and charges for fixed distances, comparing the measured forces to obtain the relation.
In SI units, K is approximately 9 times 10 to the power 9 Newton meter squared per coulomb squared in vacuum. It is also written as 1 divided by 4 pi epsilon naught, where epsilon naught is the permittivity of free space. The value of epsilon naught is 8.854 times 10 to the power minus 12 coulomb squared per Newton meter squared. Use whichever form suits the question.
The formula also contains direction when written in vector form. For charges of the same sign, the force is repulsive. For charges of opposite signs, it is attractive. The vector form handles both cases through the signs of q1 and q2 and the unit vector along the line joining them. A useful answer writing habit is to state magnitude and direction separately unless the question specifically asks only for magnitude.
Coulomb's law agrees with Newton's third law. The force on charge 1 due to charge 2 and the force on charge 2 due to charge 1 have equal magnitudes in opposite directions. Do not confuse equal force with equal acceleration. The accelerations can differ because the masses of the two particles may differ. The chapter's electron-proton comparison makes this distinction very clear.
The chapter compares electric and gravitational forces. Both follow inverse square dependence on distance, but gravity is always attractive, whereas the electric force can attract or repel. The electric force between an electron and a proton is enormously stronger than their gravitational force. The important conceptual point is not merely the large ratio, it is that electric force has two signs and can therefore cancel in arrangements of charges.
Prediction question. Two identical charged spheres are each touched by identical uncharged spheres, so each original charge becomes half. Then, the distance between the charged spheres is halved. What happens to the force? The charge product becomes 1/4, while the inverse square distance factor becomes 4. These effects cancel, so the force remains unchanged. This is an excellent example of reasoning before calculation.
What if more than two charges are present? Coulomb's law gives the pairwise force, but we need a rule for combining several forces. The principle of superposition says that the force on a charge due to several other charges is the vector sum of the forces due to each charge taken one at a time. Each individual force is unaffected by the presence of the other charges.
The word vector matters. If forces point in different directions, do not simply add their magnitudes. Resolve directions or use symmetry and vector addition. For three charges, the force on Q1 is F12 plus F13. For many charges, it is the vector sum of all pairwise contributions on Q1. Superposition is not an extra mysterious force. It is the statement that these pairwise effects combine without additional multi-charge terms.
The equilateral triangle example shows why symmetry is valuable. Three equal charges are placed at the vertices, and a charge of the same sign is at the centroid. The three forces on the central charge have equal magnitudes and directions separated symmetrically. Their vector sum is 0. You could calculate every component, but symmetry lets you predict the result efficiently. In an exam, explain the symmetry instead of writing only the final 0.
At this point, imagine a student saying the net charge of a system is 0, so the net force or field everywhere must be 0. Would you agree? No. Net charge and net field are different ideas. A dipole has total charge 0. Yet, its separated positive and negative charges produce a field. Cancellation depends on position, direction, and distance, not only on total charge.
Now we shift from force to electric field. Suppose a source charge Q is at the origin, and a small charge Q is placed at a point at distance r. Q exerts a force on Q. The field idea says that Q creates an electric field in the surrounding space, and the field at the location of Q produces the force. For a point charge, the field is E equals 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught multiplied by q by r squared in the radial direction.
The relation between force and field is F equals QE. The electric field is force per unit positive test charge. More precisely, the limiting ratio as the test charge becomes negligibly small. The source charge must not be disturbed. This is why the test charge is taken to be small. The field is a property of the source charge arrangement at a point and does not depend on the particular test charge used to measure it.
Electric field is a vector quantity and its SI unit is Newton per Coulomb. For a positive source charge, the field points radially outward. For a negative source charge, it points radially inward. At equal distances from a point charge, the field magnitude is equal, giving spherical symmetry. For a system of charges, the total field is the vector sum of the fields due to the individual charges.
Quick check. If the test charge is negative, does the electric field direction change? No. The field direction is defined using a positive test charge and belongs to the source configuration. A negative test charge experiences force opposite to the field direction because F equals QE and Q is negative. This distinction between field direction and force direction is frequently tested.
Electric field lines provide a visual way to represent a vector field. At each point, the tangent to a field line gives the direction of the electric field. Arrows show the direction, which is the direction of force on a positive test charge. For a positive point charge, lines radiate outward. For a negative point charge, they point inward.
The relative density of field lines represents relative field strength. Lines are crowded where the field is strong and farther apart where it is weak. The actual number of lines drawn is not physically important because we can choose to draw more or fewer. What matters is comparison of density in different regions. This phrase, relative density, is worth remembering for an answer.
The field of a point charge decreases as 1 over r squared, while the area of a sphere around it increases as r squared. Their product remains connected to the same number of radial lines through a given solid angle. This gives an intuitive picture of why the lines spread out with distance. The drawing is two-dimensional, but the actual field lines exist in three-dimensional space.
Here are the essential properties. Field lines start from positive charges and end at negative charges or at infinity when only one sign is present. In a charge-free region, they are continuous curves. Two field lines never cross because the field at one point cannot have two different directions. Electrostatic field lines do not form closed loops because the electrostatic field is conservative.
We have now completed the force and field foundation. Up tak we have covered charge, materials, properties, Coulomb's law, superposition, and field lines. The key decision is this: use Coulomb's law for pairwise force, use superposition when several contributions are present, and use electric field when describing the effect of a source arrangement at a point. Next, we will study a particularly important arrangement, the electric dipole.
An electric dipole is a pair of equal and opposite point charges, plus q and minus q, separated by distance 2a. Its total charge is 0, but its field is not generally 0 because the two charges are at different positions. The dipole direction is defined from the negative charge to the positive charge. The midpoint between the charges is called the center of the dipole.
At distances much larger than separation, the fields of two charges nearly cancel, but not completely. The dipole field falls with distance faster than the field of a single point charge. For a point charge, the dependence is 1 over r squared. For a dipole at large distance, the dependence is 1 over r cubed. This difference is a very important comparison question.
The dipole moment vector P has magnitude q times 2a and points from minus q to plus q. On the dipole axis, the far field magnitude is 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught multiplied by 2p by r cubed. On the equatorial plane, the magnitude is 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught multiplied by p by r cubed. and its direction is opposite to the dipole moment. Do not lose either the factor of 2 on the axis or the direction on the equatorial plane.
The chapter connects dipoles to molecules. In some molecules, the centers of positive and negative charge coincide, so the dipole moment is zero in the absence of an external field. In other molecules, the centers do not coincide, giving a permanent dipole moment. Water is given as an example of a polar molecule. The chapter also notes that some molecules can develop a dipole moment when an electric field is applied.
What happens when a permanent dipole is placed in a uniform electric field? The positive charge experiences force QE and the negative charge experiences force minus QE. The net force is zero because the field is uniform, but the forces act at different points and form a couple. The torque is tau equals P cross E with magnitude PE sine theta. It tends to align the dipole with the field.
In a non-uniform field, the dipole can experience a net force as well as torque. For a dipole parallel to the field, the net force is towards increasing field. For one antiparallel to the field, the force is towards decreasing field. The charged comb and small pieces of paper illustrate polarization. The comb induces a dipole moment in the paper, and the non-uniform field produces attraction.
Active recall. In a uniform field, does a permanent dipole have a net force, a torque, or both? It has zero net force, but generally a torque. The torque becomes zero when the dipole is parallel or anti-parallel to the field because sine theta is zero. However, the tendency to align is the important physical idea. State the condition and the formula together in an exam answer.
We now introduce electric flux. Think first of a liquid flowing through a surface. The amount crossing depends on the flow, the area, and the orientation of the surface. Electric flux uses an analogous mathematical idea, but it does not represent the flow of a physically observable substance. For a small area element, flux is delta phi equals E dot delta S or E delta S cos theta.
The area element is a vector because a plane has an orientation. Its direction is along the normal to the surface. For a closed surface, the convention is to take the outward normal. If the field is parallel to the area vector, flux is maximum. 5. If the field is perpendicular to the area vector, the dot product is zero. So flux depends on orientation, not just on the numerical area.
The unit of electric flux is Newton meter squared per coulomb. For a complete surface, the total flux is obtained by adding the flux through all small area elements, or by integration in the exact mathematical treatment. Exam point: for a closed surface, always identify the outward normal before deciding whether a contribution is positive, negative, or zero.
Gauss's law relates total electric flux through a closed surface to the total charge enclosed. The statement is total flux equals Q enclosed divided by epsilon naught. It is true for any closed surface, regardless of its shape or size. The electric field on the left may be due to charges inside and outside, but the charge on the right includes only the net charge enclosed by the chosen surface.
This distinction is one of the most important in the chapter. An outside charge can contribute to the electric field at points on a Gaussian surface, so it can contribute to local flux elements. But its total flux through the closed surface is zero, and it does not appear in the enclosed charge term. Therefore, zero net flux means zero net enclosed charge, not necessarily absence of all charges inside.
A Gaussian surface is an imaginary closed surface chosen for applying Gauss's law. It may be any convenient shape, but it should not pass through a discrete point charge because the electric field is not well defined at the charge's location. The strength of Gauss's law appears when symmetry makes the field magnitude constant over a part of the surface and gives a simple direction.
For an infinitely long straight wire with uniform linear charge density lambda, choose a cylindrical Gaussian surface coaxial with the wire. The field is radial and has the same magnitude on the curved surface. Flux through the flat ends zero because the field is parallel to those surfaces. The curved area is 2 pi RL. Gauss's law gives E times 2 pi RL equals lambda L divided by epsilon naught. So E equals lambda divided by 2 pi epsilon naught R.
For an infinite plane sheet with uniform surface charge density sigma, use a pillbox-shaped Gaussian surface crossing the sheet. Only the two flat faces contribute to flux. Their contributions add, giving total flux 2EA. The enclosed charge is sigma A. Therefore, 2EA equals sigma A divided by epsilon naught, and E equals sigma divided by 2 epsilon naught. The field is normal to the sheet and independent of distance from it.
For a uniformly charged thin spherical shell, use a concentric spherical Gaussian surface. Outside the shell, the field is as if the entire charge were concentrated at the center. E equals 1 by 4 pi epsilon naught multiplied by Q by R squared in the radial direction. Inside the shell, the Gaussian surface encloses no charge, so E times 4 pi R squared is 0 and the field is 0.
Let us compare the three applications: wire, cylindrical symmetry, and field proportional to 1 over R; plane sheet, pillbox symmetry, and field independent of distance; spherical shell, spherical symmetry, outside field proportional to 1 over R squared, inside field 0. These results are not formulas to memorize blindly. First, identify the symmetry, then select the Gaussian surface, then calculate flux and enclosed charge.
We are entering the final section now. For exam preparation, organize the chapter into 4 answer families. First, definitions, charge, conductor, insulator, electric field, dipole, flux, and Gaussian surface. Second, laws and properties, additivity, conservation, quantization, Coulomb's law, superposition, and Gauss's law. Third, diagrams, field lines, dipole orientation, area normals, and Gaussian surfaces. Fourth, derivations or applications using symmetry.
Here is a compact misconception check. Charge is scalar, but electric force and electric field are vectors. A negative source charge gives an inward electric field, but a negative test charge feels force opposite to the field. Zero total charge does not guarantee zero field. Zero flux through a closed surface means zero net enclosed charge, not no charges at all. Finally, field line density is relative. The number of lines drawn is not fixed.
Your final challenge is this. Explain, without looking at your notes, why a charged comb can attract small pieces of paper, why 2 charges are handled using Coulomb's law, why several charges require vector superposition, and why Gauss's law is especially useful for symmetric distributions. Then write the 3 applications: long wire, infinite sheet, and spherical shell. If you explain the reason behind each formula, you are moving from memorization towards mastery.
Before we close, remember the chapter's complete thread. Rubbing transfers electrons and creates charged bodies. Charge is additive, conserved, and quantized. Coulomb's law gives the pairwise force, and superposition combines several forces or fields. Electric field lines show direction and relative strength. A dipole has equal opposite charges, a dipole moment, and torque in a uniform field. Flux depends on field, area, and orientation. Gauss's law connects closed surface flux with enclosed charge and becomes powerful when symmetry is present.
That brings us to the end of this extended revision of electric charges and fields for Class 12 Physics. The common mistake to avoid is choosing a formula before identifying the physical situation: pairwise force, field at a point, dipole, flux, or a symmetric Gaussian surface. Your next step is small and concrete. Close your notes, write the 3 charge properties and the 3 Gauss law results from memory, then solve one question on Coulomb's law and one on flux. If a doubt remains, use Etsy for a step-by-step question-based explanation rather than copying an answer. I am Gaurav with Swati. Revise calmly, explain the ideas aloud, and keep building understanding one charge, field, and question at a time. We will meet in the next episode.